Legal shock and suspicion of political retaliation targeting Pastor John Kwong Hun on the Esquire Andre channel. Hello to everyone following the hot developments regarding the political and religious situation in South Korea on the Esquire Andre channel, as we are witnessing a true earthquake in the judicial system. The prosecution has officially taken action, creating a tense and controversial turning point involving key figures of the conservative movement. The story begins with a shocking announcement that the prosecution service has officially filed a request for an arrest warrant against Pastor John Kwong Hun of Sorong Jail Church. Authorities allege that he was the one behind orchestrating the violence that occurred at the Seoul Western District Court. As soon as this information was released, I felt this was not merely a normal criminal procedure but seemed like an invisible hand was pushing to accelerate the process to suppress a strong opposing voice. The Seoul Western District Prosecutor's Office received the file from the police and transferred it to the court to review the warrant today. However, the surprising and intriguing aspect is the contrasting fate of those requested for arrest. In the same batch, the police also requested an arrest warrant for Mr. Shin Hae-sik, the representative of the Shinui Hansu channel. Yet, the warrant for Mr. Shin Hae-sik was returned and not approved. This classification immediately led me to question the prosecution's review standards. Is there a compromise or strategic calculation behind releasing one person while arresting the other? In fact, this isn't the first time authorities tried to arrest them. On the 12th of last month, police filed warrants for both, but the prosecution returned the files for supplementary investigation due to differences in legal interpretation. Delving into the details of the charges, we see the investigation agency using very novel and somewhat forced arguments to accuse Pastor John Kwong Hun. They claim he engaged in psychological manipulation, or gaslighting, towards participants and paid money to aides and conservative YouTubers. Using a psychological term like gaslighting in a criminal legal document to attribute a mastermind role is truly a rare and controversial move. Based on that, they charged him with special trespassing and inciting special obstruction of official duties. I believe grafting the concept of gaslighting here might be a sign that the investigation agency lacks direct physical evidence of instruction, so they must rely on vague psychological structures to incriminate him. A huge contradiction regarding timing that I noticed in the case file is Pastor John Kwong Hun's alibi. On the day of the incident, he finished the rally around 7 p.m., dispersed the crowd, and left. Meanwhile, the riot at the Seoul Western District Court took place early the next morning. The time gap from the previous evening to the next morning is too large, making the argument for direct command weak. How can a person who left the evening before control a riot occurring early the next morning? At a different location? This incident also touches on deep legal philosophical issues regarding the people's right of resistance. Pastor John Kwong Hun's side and his supporters argue they are exercising a national right of resistance. They claim that when people are unjustly oppressed, speaking up and acting is a legitimate right and duty, not a crime. However, the investigation agency views this call to exercise the right of resistance as an act inciting violence. From a personal perspective, I see the criminalization of political slogans and treating them as evidence of a crime as a worrying trend that directly threatens freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. Furthermore, the investigation agency is using the excuse of evidence destruction to push for the arrest warrant. They allege that Sorong Jail Church replacing computers before the search was an act of destroying evidence. This is seen as the perfect pretext to justify detaining the suspect. However, the church rebuts that this was just a normal activity, and authorities are intentionally exaggerating the incident to create an image of Pastor John Kwong Hun as a deceitful person trying to hide guilt. Looking back at Pastor John Kwong Hun's history of activities, we see a stark contrast. He and his supporters have organized rallies at Gwanghwamun Square for 7 or 8 years with almost no violence occurring. On the contrary, they always cleaned up after every event. Yet now he is accused of being a ringleader of violence. Initially, the police even booked him on charges of inciting insurrection, an extremely serious charge, but later, when applying for the warrant, they quietly withdrew this charge. This suggests they realized there wasn't enough evidence for insurrection, and the initial booking was just psychological warfare to smear the pastor's reputation. To understand the source of the anger leading to the incident at the Seoul Western District Court, we need to return to the context of that night. The crowd gathered because they were outraged that an arrest warrant was issued for Mr. Yoon Seon-yeol. The subtitles mentioned former President Yoon Seon-yeol and then current president, causing some confusion about the timeline, but the essence is the public's fury over the legal processing of a leader they support. People suspected irregularities when the case was transferred to the Western District Court instead of the Seoul Central Court, raising suspicions of warrant shopping. The crowd, including young people, students, and office workers, could not contain their emotions, leading to storming the court, and everyone present at the scene was arrested. Reacting to this situation, Sorung Jail Church issued a stern statement calling this cowardly political revenge and a typical example of show law enforcement. They believe the administration is trying to remove a thorn in its side due to the pastor's past activities supporting Mr. Yoon Seon-yeol. The church also fiercely criticized the use of the term gaslighting in the warrant, considering it a violation of legal principles and an insult to the people's intellect by implying they only act like puppets. The picture of religious suppression becomes gloomier when we connect the events. Pastor Sun Hyun Bo was arrested, Yoido Full Gospel Church was raided, and Pastor Kim Jang-hwan's Far East Broadcasting Company suffered the same fate. Targeting major religious institutions successively leaves the public questioning if the administration is carrying out a large-scale campaign to suppress religious freedom. In this context, the arrest of Pastor Jeon Kwang-hun seems to be the ultimate goal. The difference in handling Mr. Shin Hae-sik is also an interesting mystery. There is information that Mr. Shin Hae-sik made statements implying contact with the presidential office and identified himself as a whistleblower. Is it because of this cooperative attitude or holding sensitive information that he was spared, while Pastor Jeon Kwang-hun, who always maintains a tough stance, was cornered? This further fuels suspicion about the fairness of the law when it is applied selectively. Finally, in my view, the core of this entire affair is the effort to silence critical voices, especially those opposing Mr. Lee Jae-myung. The administration seems to be using every tool of power to eliminate political opponents and those daring to stand up and criticize. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hun, as a symbol of the Gwanghwamun rally movement, has become the #1 target to be removed to extinguish the flame of resistance. Predicting the next developments, I believe this legal battle will escalate even more fiercely. By using the concept of gaslighting and constantly changing charges, the prosecution shows an ironclad determination to detain Pastor Jeon Kwang-hun at all costs. It is highly likely that the court will face immense pressure to approve this warrant despite legal controversies. If Pastor Jeon Kwang-hun is arrested, we may witness an even more intense wave of protests from the religious community and the conservative faction, viewing this as the last straw. As for Mr. Shin Hae-sik, in his role as a whistleblower, he might release shocking information in the near future, creating unpredictable variables for Korean politics. The administration might continue expanding investigations into other religious organizations to disperse the pastor's support base, turning this confrontation into a long and grueling battle. In summary, the arrest warrant for Pastor Jeon Kwang-hun is not just a criminal case but a test for South Korea's democracy and rule of law. It exposes harsh contradictions between state power and religious freedom, between political factions and judicial independence. The use of vague psychological terms to incriminate and the discriminatory treatment between suspects are alarming signals. The question for us is whether justice is truly being served or if this is merely a tool to purge the opposition and exact political revenge. What are your thoughts on the use of the gaslighting concept in this case? Please leave a comment so we can discuss. Don't forget to subscribe to the Esquire and Drell channel to continue updating on deep analyses and the latest developments of this shocking incident.